Welcome back, welcome back. At Frost Over the World, our doors are always open to the world's most talented and well-known faces in music, sport, film and art. So let's take a look back at some of the superstars we've met from those particular areas in recent months. Let's begin with a man I met on my recent visit to Australia, the rock star for 30 years, Sting. It's great to see you again, and if you were filling in a form which said occupation on it for passport or something like that, would you put first and foremost composer, rock star, activist? What would be the first thing?
Musician.
Musician. That would cover...
Musician is what I always wanted to make a living at, just to be a musician. I thought that was a very honourable profession. I still do. And that's what I am. Without the musician, everything else wouldn't take place. So I wouldn't compose if I wasn't a musician. I wouldn't be an activist. I wouldn't be anything. So it's music first.
Yeah, that's a very good, clear reason for all that. And I suppose that composer is the loneliest, I suppose.
It's the one I dread.
Is it?
Facing a blank page is not my favourite thing to do. In fact, I avoid the occasion by staying on tour most of the time. But eventually I have to come home and I have to face that page and pray that something will occur to me.
Yes.
Often it doesn't. Like fishing. You know, you sit there and you sit. And you just sit.
Yeah. And do you find that sometimes it comes to you as a surprise? I always remember Paul McCartney was saying that he woke up with Yesterday in his head and thought it must have been someone else's song, and he had to check around and found out that it somehow transferred itself.
Had wonderful moments like that, but not obviously as iconic as Yesterday. But it's lovely when it happens. Maybe songs are written somewhere else, in some parallel universe, and we just sort of draw them down. I don't know.
What is the feeling that you get from an audience?
It feels unbelievably fantastic. It feels it's just like a drug.
Yeah.
It really gets you.
Well, is it? Yeah. I often think it must be a bit like I'm not good enough swimmer to do this, but surfing almost. You're surfing on the wave of the audience's response. It's
a little bit like flying, I have to say. When I'm singing, I'm the truest to myself. I don't think about the past or the future. I just think about staying in tune and soaring, basically. And the audience is with you. So it's a bit like flying.
Sting there, talking to me in Australia. While I was there, I also met up with their national hero of rugby, David CAMPESE.
I think I was around 8 years old. I played rugby league. I come from a very small town, Queanbeyan, where Mark Webber comes from. And we went down to play a rugby league game in a place called Yass, a very small town. And I saw these two kids run at me, and I tried something, and I scored up the other end, and that's how it started.
And what was the technique, the key thing to the technique, having your legs forward rather than back?
No, what it was, it's hard. You had to try and get the opposition in the right position. And if you're run down the sideline, he comes across, what they do is normally they're taught as a young age, always watch their legs. So, and what I did is did sort of like this little kick where they sort of thought I was going to step and stop, and that extra second, I kept on going.
I see, and that's
what fooled a lot of players, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you started really young, didn't you, compared to most people?
Yeah, I think in those days we were very fortunate. In the 80s, the Australian rugby wasn't that great, and I was fortunate to come in at a time where we had a lot of young, good players. And in 1982, and Bob Dwyer, who's the coach of the Wallabies, 11 Wallabies actually pulled out of the tour to New Zealand in 82, and they're looking for the young guys and we're at the right place at the right time, and that's what happens.
And now a Golden Globe-winning actress, Mia Farrow, has most recently made headlines for her work for UNICEF in Africa. I met her after a recent trip to South Sudan, which, of course, as we know, has voted for independence from the North.
There's a sense of hope and exuberance at the independence, enormous. And it will be a celebration to remember, for sure, in July when independence is actually confirmed. But the borderlands are convulsed with violence. Along the border with Central African Republic, you have the LRA making its incursions with a brutality that's indescribable.
Right. Just let's explain who they are.
The Lord's Resistance Army, a Ugandan Initially, the purpose of the Lord's resistance, I believe they were meant to overthrow the Ugandan government years ago, 20 or more years ago, led by Joseph Kony. And that group has lurked in the deep bush in Central African Republic, Uganda, South Sudan, moving back and forth undetected, coming out only to steal children, rape and mutilate people, burn villages, and take what they want, and quickly going back, disappearing. So that people are in a state of true trauma along that borderland.
Along that borderland,
yeah.
right.
And then the other borderland with the north of Sudan, also a trauma because of attacks upon the village of Abyei and along that borderland.
Do you think, in fact, that the South are ready, are equipped, are qualified, not by voting and their human rights, but qualified in terms of their skills to run a country?
There's a lot of nation building that will be required of them. And for sure, I think the international community can help to put that very lowest rung of the economic ladder within their reach, within their grasp, so that they can climb out of this mire of a war-torn country. But yes, I think with help for a while, they will do just fine. It's an extraordinary people we're talking about.
Horse racing. Horse racing has a new star jockey, and not a professional one, but an amateur, Sam WALEY-COHEN. I met him to talk about racing and about a couple of his friends who were getting married.
I like doing it just for the sake of doing it. It's a sort of very simple and very, for me anyway, very pure approach to it, and it escapes some of the commercial realities of life. For me, it's about getting on, having fun and riding a racehorse and trying to win the race, and that is an end in itself. It's not about the money or what more it could lead on to. It's just purely, I'm going to go out there and do my best and try and win this race.
Yeah, and what is the sort of absolute technical difference between being a professional jockey, obviously, an amateur jockey, both sit on a horse, etc., etc.? What's the difference? What's the dividing line?
Really, it's a technicality. So, in theory, I could go professional tomorrow and say, if you would like me to ride your horse, then you have to pay me, and I take a percentage of the prize money and all the rest of it. As an amateur, actually, that percentage of prize money goes back into horse racing and helps fund the sort of administration and support of the whole network. So it's really a technicality.
And what about the royal matchmaker bit, then? That's a distinguished contribution to life.
Apparently, I read more about it than I know about it. Yeah. But no, I mean, Will and Kate have been friends for a long time, and I, to be honest, I don't think this is sort of Jane Austen moment where I sort of created this great reunion. But no, it's great that they got back together again, and no, it's incredibly exciting.
They look terrific, and
amazing.
You'd expect them to be happy, but they're very happy, I think.
The smiles on their face tells it all, really.
And while we're on the subject of the royal wedding, why was the whole world, not least the United States, so entranced by it all? I asked a British journalist, now US-based, about that. Piers Morgan.
Having been in America the last few months, I've watched this rising tide of almost a frenzy of excitement about this. And I think when you try and analyse why, I think one of the reasons is that the Americans are quite envious of the continuity that a monarchy provides. I think they often get themselves into a position where they have a really popular president. President Clinton would be a great recent example, who does 8 years, appears to be at the top of his game, and then has to leave office, and they lose a great president. And I think that in the case of the Queen, she's been there 60 years now, ruling this country. And when Americans say to me, what's the point of the monarchy, I say, it's almost a comfort blanket for the country. It's a continuity, provides security, and it provides a comfort, particularly in difficult times. I
think you're absolutely right there. I remember at the time of Watergate and so on, people in the States, friends in the States and so on, were really jealous of the Constitution in Britain, where the head of state stays and the Prime Minister can be moved on quite easily. But to remove a president is like interfering with the flag, almost.
Absolutely right. And I think the great thing about the current monarch, Queen Elizabeth, is that she's not put a foot wrong now in the entire reign. I mean, you could literally hardly find anything she's done where she's made a mistake. And there aren't many presidents where you could ever say that about.
Yeah.
So I think, again, there's a great respect for the Queen. And the Americans are a very respectful people. And I think they look at our monarchy and they look at our Queen, and they're not envious. They celebrate it. They like it. And they come here in droves. I mean, when there's a huge argument in Britain that always rages when these events come on. Are they worth the taxpayers' money that funds a large part of the royal family? Well, when you see the hundreds of thousands of tourists that pour in, mainly from America, of course they're worth it.
The music star Paloma Faith crosses the boundary between pop and jazz. I asked her how she mixes the two.
I basically work in the way that's not precious. I kind of write in bulk, and then I just throw most of it away.
Right.
And hope for a few gems.
I see, but what if you throw away one of the gems by mistake?
I think that must happen all the time.
Do you? Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
I do sort of have a sensibility and a jazz kind of affinity with jazz sensibilities, I suppose. So that's kind of what I'm drawn to. But you know, we're in a modern society, and I kind of saw myself not making any money doing that. So I decided to like bridge some sort of gap between popular culture and the sort of smoky, heartfelt pain of the great queens of tragedy, I call them, like all those great
Who are
female
the queens
singers.
of tragedy?
Like,
Billie Holiday?
Yeah, Billie Holiday and Peggy Lee and Etta James. I think Tina Turner is. Just Ella Fitzgerald, like all those great. Edith Piaf is one.
Is your your Cockney accent, is that a big plus, a big help, or is it, do some people in America or in France or Beirut, do they not understand you?
Well, I'm tempering it down a bit. I'm quite adaptable because I speak 3 languages, so I sort of understand what it is to not be able to communicate and how to adapt the way I speak, like depending on who I'm talking to. So I don't feel that I don't feel like I'm talking normally with you in this context because I'm sort of trying to be understood, if you know what I mean. But at home it's terrible. I've got the worst mouth ever. But yeah, at times it's been sort of slightly, I've faced a little bit of prejudice about it in the past. I think as well because I've always been quite academic, and I guess in like my sort of student days often people sort of preconceive that because of my accent I might not be able to be as intellectual as the next person who speaks a, you know, posh accent or whatever. And that's happened to me a few times in a few different institutions. I find it quite bizarre when people like Janet Street Porter exist, and you know, they're real inspirations, I think.
To you?
Yeah, because they're completely like unaffected by that expectation, but yet are great minds.
Yeah. Actor Geoffrey Rush has had a string of hits, including an Oscar, a Tony, an Emmy, 2 Golden Globes and 3 BAFTAs. He's also, as he told me, something of an expert in dying on film.
There's someone alerted me to a website called Cinemorgue. They said, you're on it a lot. And I thought, oh yeah, and I went on and I looked at all the films, and I'd never really thought about that. But, you know, Javert from Les Miserables throws himself into the Seine. Trotsky gets a pickaxe in the head. Barbosa gets shot at the end of... You know, the list goes on, and I thought... I never really thought about the characters in that way. Yeah. But I thought, people obviously think now whenever I come into a film, well, he'll be dead in Act 5.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sympathetic with that. That used to happen to me at school. Like, every year I was cast in some part where I had to wear a beard and got killed at the end of Act 1.
Yeah. They're the parts that you start to look for as you get a little older.
Actually, of course, the thing about Pirates of the Caribbean is you may have died, but you resurrected yourself. Or you were resurrected.
I wasn't aware that that was going to happen. The first film was always called Pirates of the Caribbean, and I think about during the last week of shooting, we started to get Disney letterhead memos that said Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, and we all went, oh, colon, that we smell sequel.
Yes,
you know. And Gore Verbinski phoned me up to say, you know, we're going to make parts 2 and 3 and shoot them simultaneously. And I said, well, I'm dead. I hope you all have a wonderful time, because it is a very enjoyable set to work on. He said, no, we're bringing you back with a little movie magic, but mostly voodoo magic, because you've got a big task ahead of you to gather all these people to help free Teodalma, and the plot gets quite Wagnerian.
Oh, great. And they say, the last figure I saw, but you may have seen it later on, but that it's taken 2.68 billion so far or something.
The figure is somewhere around there. I tend to not try and think of the film too much in economic terms. That comes up a lot. But as Johnny Depp said, even on the first film, before we knew what the kind of popularity would be, he said, you know what, it feels like we're working on an independent film that just happens to have, I don't know, $250 million behind its production. And that's the spirit that Gore Verbinski and Jerry Bruckheimer and now Rob Marshall have brought to the project. You know, you do find yourself on location sometimes 30 miles offshore. They'll grapple together 4 oil tankers to form unit base, and we're all taken out with a massive marine department to get 80 pirates out there and all the stunt people and all the crew. Then there's lunch for 800, you know, and I just think, how do they get the eggs out here for the omelette? You can see where the budget goes.
Yes, absolutely. Geoffrey Rush there. Another Oscar-winning actor, Vanessa Redgrave, came here to tell me about a new rose which was being launched at Chelsea Flower Show and has a particular significance.
This all started with a friend of Jolie's. A close friend of Jolie's suggested to her that we might think of having a rose named after Tasha, and through her we were directed to the Harkness brothers, and that's how it happened that we found ourselves in a group of greenhouses and out in the fields of roses, and between Hitchin and Letchworth actually, and saw something of some part of this enormous process of how roses are grown. And we saw beautiful, beautiful roses, and about 3 had been grown and not named. The one that you were looking at just now, it has a very, very special smell. Jolie says it smells like Tasha's favourite perfume.
The last time you saw Natasha was in hospital, of course, in New York. Yeah.
No, yeah, that's right.
And that just must have hit you. It was such a shock. It was so sudden. It's all within 48 hours, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very quick.
Incredible. Yeah. And I suppose if she'd been wearing a helmet, would it have been not quite so bad, do you think?
Oh, it would have been all right. It would have been all right. One of the things that you often can't realise it at the time, but one of the terrific things we heard quite shortly after Tasha died was that a little girl had had a ball in some game in a schoolyard, hit her head, and she'd been fine, gone home. And the report on Natasha having died because of what seemed like a slight ski injury was on the television, and her parents saw it and suddenly realised they must get their girl to a doctor. They rang the hospital, and the hospital said straight away, bring her right in. And so, thanks to Natasha, her life was saved. And I can't but think, David, that actually it's so typical of Tash. You know, as everybody who remembers her, you remember her so well.
Very much.
Always right out. Oh, you're here, and always bringing life.
Yeah.
So she sure made life and brought life, I mean, in that specific way. And now, when you see photographs on the slopes, unless they're models, everybody's got a helmet.
Let's finish this programme with one of my most recent guests, the American musician, writer and performer both, Alicia Keys. I asked her why, of all the charitable subjects, AIDS was the one that had caught her philanthropic attention most.
My organization is called Keep a Child Alive, and to me, AIDS is the biggest tragedy. And it's been happening for now 30 years, and it's, you know, there's so much that has to happen to really pay attention to it and to eliminate it. I think that there's not enough attention giving to the AIDS pandemic, and it's such an important situation that's wiping out generations after generations. Especially our focus is in Africa and India, and generations are just being wiped out. I became a part of it because I actually, it was kind of very by chance. And I met this wonderful woman named Lee Blake, who is the co-founder of Keep a Child Alive. And she started to tell me about the pandemic in Africa. And I was only 18 years old, and I had just started kind of getting ready to put out my first record, and I really hadn't traveled to that extent, and it was all very new to me, and I couldn't believe that so many people were dying and so many people didn't have access to a treatment that existed in the West, and it just didn't make sense to me. So as I went on tour and time passed, I was asked to go to Africa and to perform. And so I was very excited because I felt honored that people knew me all the way over there.
Yeah.
And when I went there, it was for a particular thing that was centered around AIDS, and I started to meet people. And I started to meet these young people that had lost their parents and were becoming heads of their own household. So maybe they were 15 years old, and they were the part of child-headed households where they took care of their younger brothers and their younger sisters. And I was so close to their age, I felt instantly hit, because I said, wow, what if I was only 14 or 13 and lost my parents, had no one there to guide me, had to take care of my younger brothers and sisters? Would anybody care? Would anybody listen? And it really motivated me to want to be a part of helping to get access.
Yes, that's fascinating, because there's a new situation now, isn't there, in a sense that people sense in articles in London and New York and wherever else, sense that we're on the verge of a scientific breakthrough.
Yes.
That we already have a great improvement, obviously, in people living with HIV for 32 years and things like that. But we're on the verge of a breakthrough. Or people, this is more selfish, feel that, okay, Africa has it, but we don't have to worry about it here, wherever, Sweden, wherever. For those two reasons, it's going to get more and more difficult to keep people energized about the problem, because it seems as though it's got a lot better than it was.
Well, I mean, I think you have some really strong points there. And yes, there has been the discovery that when one is on ARVs, which is the medicine that treats it, that the percentage of spreading it, you have a 96% chance of not spreading the disease to an uninfected person, which is amazing. That's incredible, but it should just push people to know how important treatment is. So I think instead of it becoming a more passive attitude, like, oh, well, we've made such strides, instead we have to focus on how important treatment is. And I think that's part of what I want to do, is I want to help keep the eye on it.
Alicia Keys there, bringing this particular programme to a close. There are so many highlights from our recent programmes that I'll be back with more of them next week, including Anthony Hopkins, Carl Lewis, Cuba Gooding Jr. and Bob Woodward. Do join me, same time next week. Bye-bye for now.